My name is Mindy Johnson. I'm an animation author and historian, and delighted to welcome you to the 2022 Spark Animation Festival. We are thrilled that you're here and have joined us, and we appreciate your continued support for all of the terrific programming and content offered here, not only in this year's festival, but in past festivals as well. Within our Legacy and Legends track, I am delighted to share with you yet another remarkable session exploring aspects of our collected animated past. It's my great pleasure to introduce this 25th anniversary celebration event, one of the most landmark treasures of the great master Hayao Miyazaki in the animated classic Princess Mononoke. Joining us today in celebration of this masterpiece is renowned author and anime historian Susan Napier. It's my great pleasure to welcome you. Susan, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Mindy. Sorry. Yes, okay. I want to make sure I can share my screen. Thank you, Mindy. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here. And I mean both those words, wonderful and pleasure, because it's a real pleasure to be giving a talk at an animation symposium. As an academic, I kind of come from the talk about stuff side of the fence. I don't have a lot of creative ability. In fact, I was so bad at art that I was the only person in first and second grade whose artworks or little drawings were never displayed on the wall. It was traumatic, and I'm still recovering from it. But that did not make me not appreciate art or animation in particular. And that leads me to the second word, which is wonderful or wonderfully, because it is really wonderful to be here in 2022 talking about Princess Mononoke, one of the really seminal animated movies of the century. And at the same time, a movie that has had a very interesting history. I will say that when Princess Mononoke first came out, this was in Japan in 1997. I actually went to see it because I had already started working on animation. I was very interested in Japanese animation in particular. I had seen the movie Akira. I had also seen Miyazaki's movie Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind. I'd begun to be very interested in Miyazaki. So I am a Japan specialist. So I got to Japan and had heard a lot about the movie before I even arrived in Tokyo, that it was at a certain point, finally it grossed, I think, $120 billion at the Japanese box office. It beat out whatever the major Spielberg film was at that moment. And going into the theater, I noticed how many people were there, but not only just the number of people, but also the cross generations. There were couples, there were children, there were grandparents, they were young women out, on a kind of special, fun time on a Saturday afternoon, and young men wearing business suits. I mean, it was clearly a major event in Japan. So I got back to the States and discovered that Princess Mononoke was going to be shown as part of a deal with Walt Disney Studios on the big screen in America with a big rollout, a big publicity tour. And this was what I mean by the wonderful aspect of all this, because at the time I dared to dream that maybe this was the big moment, that this was where anime was going to just show its stuff, and that the world, not just in America, but around the world, would begin to really appreciate how cool and amazing anime was. And a number of other people shared my feelings. These people would be also anime fans themselves. I was actually in Austin, Texas when the movie came out, and there was a great deal of excitement at the theater. And we actually had the chance to have Neil Gaiman, who had been the person who wrote the script in English, come and talk to us. And again, thrills and excitement, a palpable feeling in the air that this was going to be the big moment. And from then on, anime was just going to be rolling. And Neil Gaiman was great, and everyone applauded him, and we all walked out in this kind of haze of joy and anticipation. Well, it didn't quite work out that way in terms of Princess Mononoke totally, suddenly, epically changing the landscape for anime in the rest of the world. I believe it grossed about $2 million in the American box office, despite some very good reviews, including a good review, strong review in the New York Times by Janet Maslin, and generally a strong consensus among the critics that this was really worth seeing. But it just did not seem to catch hold with the American public. And I'm going to talk about this as we go along in this talk. But for the moment, I will say that what's ironic is that now in 2022, we realize how many, many ways Princess Mononoke was very, very important in 1997 and in 1999, and even more now in 2022. What Princess Mononoke has done is it gives us a different way of looking at animation and at the world. And so I've titled my talk, What the Kodama See, The View from Princess Mononoke. And of course, those of you who've seen the film know that the Kodama are these little tree spirits, and they do a lot of time looking out at the screen, looking at the audience. And so point of view is a very important aspect of my talk today. So one of the first ways in which we see a different point of view coming in with Princess Mononoke is that this is, there was a fair amount of initial amount of publicity around it when Disney and Ghibli and Ghibli's parent company Tokuma signed the agreement. And there was also a sense of, wow, we're going to have to be marketing this non-American, non-Western animated film. And that's was quite a step because indeed, Ghibli and Japan's viewpoint is very different from a conventional American animation or conventional American Hollywood cinema. And these people who you see in front of you, Hayao Miyazaki is on the left, the great director who creates the immersive worlds that have been so important as Ghibli's most famous product. And then in the middle, we have Toshio Suzuki, his producer, and Takahata Isao, who was the late Takahata Isao, who was the partner of Miyazaki as the other major director in Studio Ghibli. And by this point, in Princess Mononoke's, with Princess Mononoke's appearance, Suzuki and Miyazaki had been working together very well, and they had really started to create this sort of amazing Ghibli brand, really, in which did help the rollout of the movie in Japan. At the same time, it was quite a even in Japan, as we'll see, it was initially, there was this feeling of, are we going to be able to get this movie into theaters, into people coming back to it? Is it too different? And then we take this even further across the Pacific, and we think, oh yeah, so here's a Japanese movie about 14th century Japan with demons and wild beasts and very kind of unusual characters, and how's that going to work? So point of view is something I want to talk a little bit about, because I think animation of all things is really one of the best media to kind of show things from different points of view. And this, for those of you who are in animation, you probably know this very famous series called Out of the Inkwell. It was created by Max Fleischer of the Fleischer brothers in 1918. And the point of it was to show off what animation could do, actually rotoscoping in particular. But as they created this series, it also became a way of expressing some of animation's really distinctive aspects. As you can see in the slide, you have a human hand and a sort of live action human hand, and then you have a caricature, an animated caricature. And this was this movie. These little episodes were showing interaction between human and non-human in a very basic but whimsical and fun way. Because the idea was that this little entity on the right is Coco the clown, and Coco the clown comes out of the inkwell thanks to the animator's magic and moves around and does things and actually plays tricks on the animator, runs off. In other words, establishes himself as a distinctive presence that is not human, not the animator, and is actually kind of destabilizing our vision of the world, because all of a sudden, something that came out of the head, which is what animation is. It's something that's creative. It comes out of ideas and images in the conscious mind of the animator, but also sometimes in the subconscious. I think that's particularly true sometimes of Miyazaki. And it comes out and it kind of pushes at us. It at its most experimental, it really gives us a different way of communing with the non-human world. And already in 1918, in the United States animation, they were actually doing something like that. Now, Out of the Inkwell is not immediately what you think of in terms of Princess Mononoke, but my thesis is that Princess Mononoke also destabilizes our conception of the world, and also gives voice and image to the non-human in a way that kind of gets under your skin, and that really does affect the way we end up thinking about all kinds of different things. So let's go into Princess Mononoke itself. When it came out in 1997, you can see from the slide that this is one of the early posters or kind of visual representations of the movie, advertisements for the movie. And if you look at the characters, probably don't read Japanese, but they almost look hand-drawn. There's something kind of a little crude or sort of certainly not elegant about them. And also, if you can see in the back, these carvings, there's something almost primordial. They're going back to very early Japanese history. And so Princess Mononoke was just even in this little picture here, trying to advertise itself as a different kind of animated movie. We're not talking about America or the West right now or other parts of the globe, but about Princess Mononoke in Japan itself, that it was trying to set up its audience for something unusual and different. To give a little bit of the plot, it's set in the 14th century. Mainly, it takes place in a wilderness, a forest, where, as the opening lines of the movie inform us, wherein dwelt the gods. So this is a tale of Japan in the 14th century, but it's already very far away from the typical thing you might expect in a 14th century film by Kurosawa, the great live-action filmmaker. There are very, very few samurai in the film, and those that are not particularly brave or powerful or impressive. There are virtually no peasants. If anything, it shows some early industrialization, which is very unusual. And there are gods and demons and animals who play as much, and nature itself, who play as much of a part in this film as any human being. So it starts out with, speaking of gods, nature, demons, and animals, with an extraordinary sequence, which is when a wild boar which has been infected or cursed by an iron ball that comes out from somewhere from a gun, has lodged inside it and ultimately turned it into a demonic force known as a tatarigami. And in this scene, the boar has traveled across the wilderness to another place far away from the sort of central Japan where it's come from, and it's attacking a village. And it attacks the village, and the villagers who are more close to nature than the people back in central Japan do not want to kill the boar. They would rather not, but the boar is so full of rage, it can't stop itself. And it comes in and gets very, very close to destroying Ashitaka, this young man who's riding a red elk on the left-hand side. And ultimately, it does affect part of Ashitaka. His arm becomes tainted by the curse, and he is then left to go to see if he can find out some way of curing himself by going on a journey back into the central Japanese central. And when he does this, he finds a beautiful forest, a beautiful green forest, which is known as the forest of the Shishigami, or the forest of the nature god. And this nature god is has two manifestations, one in the daytime as a kind of deer-like creature, and the other time as a very amorphous, strange blue and silver creature, ectoplasmic creature known as the Shishigami. He also encounters two humans, or quasi-humans in one case, San, who I'm calling for short the wolf girl. She is human, but she's been raised by wolves. In the picture, you can see her. She's got her head up against a furry creature. That furry creature is her wolf mother named Moro. And San is very suspicious of humans. She identifies as a wolf. And Ashitaka also encounters Lady Eboshi, the ruler of a place known as Iron Town. And Iron Town, as I said, is kind of almost industrial. It's a place of iron smelting. And it is not an attractive, beautiful, kind of traditional idea of the Japanese scenery. It's a heavy-duty iron foundry with steams spewing out. And it's located on the edge of the forest where they get their iron ore. And Eboshi is actually trying to destroy the Shishigami that we just saw, the forest god, in order to quell the forest and be able to get her iron ore more easily. So at the end of the movie, we see Eboshi shooting the god's head off. I say note the flowers on her gun, because there's a moment when she's trying to shoot it, and it still has so much power that it causes the gun for a little while to kind of metamorphose into something else, another beautiful little the scene of metamorphosis that Miyazaki is so good at. But ultimately she does succeed, and the god's death throes, as it searches for its head, an enormous amount of primordial ooze blocks the sky, destroys the forest, and it does seem like the world is, at least that part of the world, is going to be destroyed. However, the movie ends, I wouldn't say with a Disney-esque happily ever after, but the head, the Shishigami, the night, the forest spirit's head is restored by human hands, which is important. And the forest does kind of come back, although in a rather blander form, I would say. But we don't have what we'd expect in a Hollywood movie of the usual resolution in which San and Ashitaka go off into the sunset and get married and live happily ever after. Instead, they say goodbye to each other. San says, I can't forgive humans. I do love you, Ashitaka, but I just can't live with the humans. And Ashitaka says, I understand. I'm going to stay in Irontown. I'm going to try and rebuild Irontown in a better way, and we'll see each other every so often. So not quite your typical animated film or your typical Hollywood film at all. And so what was Disney going to do with a film like this? Well, this is quite interesting. This picture here shows one interesting thing, which is that this is John Lasseter of Pixar, who's a huge fan of Miyazaki and really worked to get Miyazaki known in the United States. And then on the right-hand side, you see, again, Miyazaki and Suzuki. So you have Lasseter really understood what what Ghibli was about. Disney, on the other hand, had its own point of view. And this was very difficult to kind of combine, to overlap with what Princess Mononoke was and what Miyazaki was trying to show in the film. The first issue was the very famous story of no cuts. The film, Princess Mononoke, is about 2 hours and 15 minutes. That's a long film, especially for an animated film, especially for one distributed by Disney, or actually it was Disney decided it needed to be distributed by Miramax because there's a lot of violence in the film. It's kind of harrowing at certain moments, and Miramax was seen as the art independent studio that belonged to Disney. The head of Miramax was a very famous man named Harvey Weinstein, and Harvey Weinstein apparently felt absolutely that movies should be 90 minutes. And especially if he's going to be bringing a foreign film to an American audience, you're going to have to do something about this. And he suggested 40 minutes of cuts, which is a lot of cuts. That's, I think, 20% of the film, at least, maybe a little bit more. And this story has been told by both Steve Alpert, who wrote a wonderful book about his time at Ghibli. Steve Alpert was originally a Disney employee, then came to work for Ghibli. He speaks Japanese brilliantly, and he was part of the whole team that brought Princess Mononoke to the States, and he had some very interesting stories about trying to deal with Harvey Weinstein, who was really kind of angry when Miyazaki and Suzuki said, sorry, we're not going to cut it. And by the way, this is contractual. When Disney and Tokuma and Ghibli signed the contract, they said no cuts. But the story is, and this has been told by both Neil Gaiman and Steve Alpert, that Suzuki at some point presented Harvey Weinstein with a samurai sword and said, no cuts. Well, they did release Princess Mononoke uncut, but it's a question as to whether their heart was then in the marketing, at least according to Neil Gaiman, who has a very interesting interview with BBC last July about Princess Mononoke. Disney kind of lost heart in terms of really pushing Princess Mononoke. And Neil Gaiman feels that this really was unfortunate. Apparently, Harvey Weinstein didn't even show up for the premiere, and they actually cut back on the number of theaters that they were going to show it in, and they also just didn't do a lot of promotion of any kind that would kind of nurture an audience that would understand what was going on. And I really do think Mr. Gaiman is right here, because I do think that with a certain amount of education and kind of putting connecting with the right audience, Princess Mononoke might have been at least more of a hit. But instead, rather than really try to educate the audience about the Japanese point of view, they decided to put the American point of view onto the film. And this is from a book that I do recommend if you're interested in finding out more about Princess Mononoke. It's edited by Raina Dennison. It's called Princess Mononoke, Understanding Studio Ghibli's Monster Princess. And this is from a chapter in the book by Liz Carter, in which she talks about the marketing of Princess Mononoke. And overall, the sense is that Disney felt that for this film to succeed, the promotion needed to stress not only Japaneseness, but also, and at times more importantly, its Americanness. So how did it do that? Well, you'll see that some very different kind of posters were created. These, of course, are the Japanese posters. You will note how the human form is still very, very much juxtaposed with a non-human form. In the first one on the left, we see San, the wolf girl, with her mother, Moro. And also, interestingly enough, we see San is holding her mask. You can see it down in the left-hand corner, which she dons at some point when she attacks the village, the Iron Town, or when she's just sort of becoming part of kind of mingling with her wolf tribe. So we see her as inherently something that is kind of liminally or only marginally human. With Ashitaka, please note that he's also wearing a mask, and he is very much part of and with a non-human entity, his red elk, whose name is Yakult, and who is a very benign, very, very charming presence in the film, despite the fact that Yakult doesn't speak. He and Ashitaka obviously understand each other very well. So we have a nice combination of the animal and the human. And this is included, actually gone even further with the Inhuman now making an appearance in the VHS cover, where we see one of the Kodama, these little forest spirits, who's kind of beckoning, leading the way into the forest, beckoning us to buy the VHS tape, to go and to take it into our home and bring the Kodama in, bring this non-human, utterly kind of uncanny creature into our home with us. And on the right, we have the DVD where we have San and Moro, the wolf mother, and her wolf brother, and the Kodama, and also the forest itself, which is an important entity as well. Very, very much a key character in the film, I would say. Now let's look at the American posters. Well, first of all, you don't see much about Studio Ghibli there. And you'll also notice that the emphasis has changed rather a lot. Ashitaka is seen in a very warlike mode. In fact, Ashitaka is a mediator in the film. Very definitely, he sometimes has to use his sword. He doesn't want to. He's trying to avoid war between Irontown and the beasts and demons whom Lady Eboshi is trying to quell. And this poster really gives a very different sense of him as a warrior creature. And we do see a little bit on the right hand, sort of behind his shoulder, of the Kodama, but they are very much subsumed into this very strong visual of a young boy. And then in the other poster, the tagline is, "The fate of the world rests on the courage of one warrior." So this is again, we see it's a fate of the world kind of thing. It's very sort of traditional sort of saving the world by one warrior, not by being an intermediary, not by trying to kind of bring the communities together, not by trying to talk with or interact with non-human entities, but just by being courageous and being a warrior. And it's interesting, you may notice that what is going on with that sort of almost looks like a coin, which is sort of a vision of San that makes her, again, completely warlike and not really related much to nature at all. And also, where's the wolf? The wolf is such an important part of the Japanese one. What happened? Well, obviously, they didn't want the wolf because maybe the wolf was scary. One of the things we're also dealing with is Disney's traditional audience is families and children. Now, Miramax was seen as pointing at an older audience, but still, it's clear that they were trying to kind of get away from anything that seemed too strange or weird or maybe scary. Another issue that was very much part of this question of Americanization is what we would call the "who's a good guy" issue. There really isn't an obvious, totally heroic hero, and there also is not an obvious villainous villain. And this was definitely part of the issue that Disney was trying to deal with, Miramax was trying to deal with in terms of marketing and conveying this strange film. So what I'd like to talk about now is how Princess Mononoke's strangeness, radicalness, subversiveness actually has stayed with us and has become more important and more relevant as these 25 years have passed by. So the first of its radical strategies is more the one that is more perhaps appreciated by the Japanese, and that is looking at history from a new point of view, not the traditional samurai battles, peasants kind of thing, but a lone person coming from actually non-Japanese community, a community that's more nature-oriented, being kind of forced into coming into Japan and kind of looking, going into a Japan that is not the traditional Japan. We don't see a castle. We don't see the rice paddies. What we see instead is a kind of fantastical world of, so say, the demonic, the gods, and nature. So this is history that is really non-human centered. It's a much larger tapestry of history that Miyazaki is trying to point out. And to the average Japanese who've grown up with the usual top-down history, this was quite a shock, and this was quite radical. And I'm saying this for the Japanese audience, but I also think increasingly for American audiences that we are now used to not seeing history from the top down, getting away from the master narratives of history that people in the 1960s and 70s and 80s were being brought up with into a different kind of viewpoint of looking at history. Okay, and what is that viewpoint? Well, it's history from the margins. And who are these marginals? Well, in Princess Mononoke, they're a very interesting group and very diverse. They include women, and not just women from a normal, quote unquote, regular middle class vision, or even from good peasant women helping out in the rice paddies. These are women who Lady Eboshi, who we've already met, has recruited and has taken out of brothels and really terrible jobs and strange, awful places, and given them shelter and work and really a reason to live by becoming part of Irontown, this place that she presides over, and teaching them useful skills like how to fire guns, and again, really giving them a sense of purpose. But as I say, this is really not typical of Japanese history or of most historical accounts, when you see people who just really are the silence, the disenfranchised coming to the fore. And these women play a very strong role in the movie. Okay, even more unusually, Miyazaki brings in a group of lepers who are people who are suffering from Hansen's disease, whom Lady Eboshi has also recruited. They are very skillful with their hands in creating equipment and firearms. And she also gives them a reason to live. She gives them respect. She gives them a place to be part of. I would also say that I believe that although Hansen's disease sufferers are the ones are mentioned in the movie, I think it's also that Miyazaki is implicitly talking about other very disenfranchised people in Japan that had not before ever been given a voice. So again, this is, of course, we're talking about Princess Mononoke, a Japanese film, but I think idea of disenfranchised people, maybe of different ethnicities, different classes, being able to see it from their point of view is indeed a radical step. And one person who noticed this is Neil Gaiman, who in this BBC interview that I talked about is mentioned earlier, is saying, he's talking about contemporary world. He's talking about 2020. He says, now we really are, in trouble here. And he says, it's only going to get worse. And now what do we do? How do we survive? And he goes back to these marginalized people in Princess Mononoke. We're like the people trying to figure it out, do what the people are trying to figure out do in Irontown. And then he points out that even now, except we're not really taking as much care of the sex workers and the people with leprosy. Now, we're still not quite there where this movie was saying we should be 1997, 25 years ago. We're getting closer. We're at least aware of the larger parameters of society, but it's still not sure that we've yet kind of created a community together as is shown in an almost utopian way in Princess Mononoke. Another big issue or big strategy in Princess Mononoke, and this is not so unusual if you know any of Miyazaki's previous works. He right from the very beginning with the first movie he made that is now considered a Ghibli movie or a proto-Ghibli movie because it was made enough money that they could found Ghibli. Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind. He's had very, very strong, interesting, intriguing, autonomous female figures with a lot of agency. But again, I should stress that still in 1997, This was quite a big step, especially, again, if you're looking at it from the Hollywood or American animation industry, where you simply at this point do not have these very interesting, competent, powerful women figures. And as David John Boyd said, the image of the girl has always been the territory for a confrontation with the patriarchal project of history. So once again, where we have a different point of view, a point of view that's confronting a patriarchal history and saying, hey, look at me. And this girl, as you can see, San is not a cutie pie. She is not a babe. She's aligned with a non-human creature, her wolf mother. She's covered with blood. In this scene from the film, Ashitaka, the man who's come to find out what's going on with his cursed arm, sees her, and she looks at him. She's busy sucking the blood out of the wound of her mother. She looks at him with this kind of anger and contempt, and then she goes and spits the blood out. And that's their first encounter, and it's not a particularly feel-good, meet-cute encounter. So how about the image of the villain? I want to go back to that just for a moment, because Lady Eboshi is one of the characters that my students, I teach at Tufts, I teach courses on Miyazaki, and I teach a course on Disney Studios and Ghibli Studios. The lack of a villain is something that my students often have trouble with, although I think they're getting more used to it, because I think the lack of a villain is something that is now, or an overt villain is something that's seeping into American popular culture too. But I do want to mention this very amusing exchange that Steve Alpert talks about in his book, The Never-Ending Man, Sharing a House with the Never-Ending Man, when he's dealing with the Miramax executives. And he says, quotes them, these are the questions from Miramax. This guy, Lord Asano, who is he? Is he a good guy or a bad guy? Who are the samurai working for? Why were they attacking a village? Why were they attacking Lady Eboshi? She's a bad guy, right? Who is this guy Jigo, and who does he work for? Why does he want the deer god's head? Is he a good guy or a bad guy? Why is the deer god a god? Is that a Japanese thing? Is he a good god or a bad god? It goes on like this. And, basically he explains, I explained that Miyazaki really doesn't have good guys or bad guys in his films, but tries to take a more nuanced view of human nature. I told them that I didn't know exactly if there were clear answers to their questions, and that part of Miyazaki's intent was for us to think about it or to be satisfied with the uncertainty of not knowing for sure. But of course, they go right back and say, so really, who's the bad guy? So this is, again, we see this very different point of view that is just not really permeating the Miramax executives' minds. So back to the margins. Let me go back to the real seriously marginal stuff that Miyazaki is expressing, whose views Miyazaki is expressing in this film. And this is the non-human. And this is where I think animation is so, performs such an amazing function. And particularly, yes, Miyazaki, who's a brilliant animator, can do this. He can create a world of non-humans, natural spirits, perhaps demonic, that absolutely speaks to us in its own way. And it's partly because he is brilliant at animation. He also has a very strong sense of the other world, and he can channel this into his animation. And this is something that is I think with Princess Mononoke really starts a new chapter in not just animation history, but kind of in the history of how we look around us. And I would say to kind of shorten this, I would say, is it animism? And I think it is animism. And animism is something that has not been very well regarded in Western culture. It was seen as something primitive that, these tribes, people out there, somewhere in these strange places would do. And because it involves attributing sentience to other beings. It involves treating other creatures as if they have some kind of soul, be it, and it doesn't have to be even animals. It can also be a waterfall. It can be a plant, a tree, a forest, or it can be something like the wind, a spirit of the wind, or a spirit of the forest. And this, for a long time, was really considered just really against everything that Western Judeo-Christian culture is about. Because Judeo-Christian culture starts in the Old Testament with God giving Adam dominion over the things that crawl, over the things that swim. Basically, it's Judeo-Christian Western values are very human-oriented, very human-centered. But recently, this has started to change. And one of the most interesting things about looking at scholarship on Princess Mononoke is increasing awareness of how Princess Mononoke is bringing animism in a form that is in a way, understandable or at least approachable by audiences, Japanese and Western. And it's part of a larger movement in the West now to acknowledge animistic ideas as one way of dealing with the kind of crisis that we are dealing with now, which is a sense of humans being more and more isolated from nature, and how we need to redress, reorient ourselves to a very different way of looking at nature. And a lot of American scholars or Western scholars think that this goes back to the Japanese indigenous belief system known as Shinto, which is indeed very animistic. And it does indeed see you can have a sacred tree, you can have a sacred waterfall. And it is a sense of you're in the world, you're a human in the world, but you're interacting with all these other non-human entities around you. And that's okay. That's what the world is about. Miyazaki himself is kind of a little bit dubious of certain aspects of Shintoism. He himself says he doesn't like the gaudy shrines and the kind of festivals and things. For him, as he says, the Japanese gods are in the darkness. And I like that because darkness is very much a part of Miyazaki's oeuvre, Miyazaki's vision. His films are full of joy and beauty, but they also acknowledge darkness, even in early films, I would say, like Totoro, which has a sense of the possibilities of possibly bad things happening, and very much so in Princess Mononoke, where we see danger and anger and warfare and death. But this is all part of the larger world that we really have to deal with. So can we take this away from Miyazaki and think about animism and animation in general? I would say, hell yes. And from the beginning, to go back to Phantasmagoria, Emile Cole's very early work, we see the pleasure, the joy in animation that it creates. It creates a flower. It creates a person on top of a flower, or a kind of creature on top of a flower. And we go back again to Out of the Ink Pot. Early animation really was, I think, experimental and exciting. And it really was kind of crossing the boundaries between human and non-human in its very form, as a medium. Things started to change, of course. But even early on with Disney's work, there's really some experimental and exciting stuff going on. This is from Steamboat Willie, one of the very first of Disney's Mickey Mouse cartoons, in which it's kind of interesting. We see Minnie Mouse in this case, but there's also Mickey as well. They are transforming a goat into a music machine. And so we have the sort of animism of Minnie, but we also have a really different kind of entity, which is a goat as a machine. And there's a kind of moment when you think, wow, they could go on with this. This could be really exciting. But Disney then changes its course and becomes more conservative, more perhaps approachable, very much giving a world in which animated entities, they may be animated, they may move, but they're fundamentally anthropomorphic. They have faces. They look like humans, or kind of humans who, what a human would look like if it were a clock, or what a candlestick would look like if it were a human. But there isn't really a lot of excitement in terms of making something that really is other. rather quite the opposite. This is also true, of course, with Disney animals. They're heavily anthropomorphized. The creatures in Lion King, the animals are very definitely, they have very, very human facial expressions. They have human ambitions, human desires. They just happen to look like lions. And this is where I think anime really does kind of counteract Disney and Princess Mononoke in particular. This is from a really interesting article that came out very recently called "And If the Bakemono Responded." And bakemono are one way the Japanese refer to non-human entities. They are, bake means to change, to transform, and mono means things. So they are things that transform. And in this article, he talks about bakemono as in terms of Princess Mononoke, and explains how radical this vision is that Princess Mononoke is producing, precisely because it can use the medium of animation and anime. And he suggests, I argue that the essential openness of anime allows for a rich visual archive of counter-hegemonic and non-human animals. So this is really going against so much of what Western culture has been about. These are not creatures who are part of our daily lives. They are other, and they are happy to be other. Because anime offers a unique medium where visual representation has no inherent limitations. And I would say this isn't just anime, but animation in general, that you don't have to keep to the boundaries. You can cross the boundaries. You can penetrate the boundaries. You can get rid of the boundaries. Because it has no inherent limitation, anything can be drawn and animated. Species and identity. Boundary can be opened and questioned in extremely creative and compelling ways. And that is what Princess Mononoke is really at heart all about. It is really crossing boundaries, and it's questioning them in creative, compelling, and often just aesthetically incredibly memorable and beautiful ways. So to return to the boar, this is very different from The Lion King. This boar is not cute nor cuddly, but it does speak. But if you remember the opening scene, it's quite shocking. Ashitaka has shot it. It is dying. And Ashitaka says, again, very respectfully, because he comes from a tribe of people who do respect the non-human, says, we are sorry. And there is the village kind of shamanist comes in and says, we will do our best to create a place of respect for you, for your body after you're dead. And the boar does not say, oh, thank you very much, kind humans. It says, you disgusting, loathsome creatures. And that is really quite shocking. I remember when I first saw this thing, whoa, because Miyazaki and Princess Mononoke is not going to give us the comfort of feeling like, oh yeah, we're okay, we can handle this, because maybe we can't handle it. And that's what the boar is saying. He's saying, you're going to feel my wrath. And I can't help thinking in 2022, we are feeling nature's wrath in so many, many ways, but it's beautifully metaphorically presented and visually presented in this vision of the boar, the dying boar. Now the boar speaks, but there are other non-human entities in the film who don't speak, but who I would argue are still extremely eloquent. And this is particularly the case of the Shishigami, or the forest god, who, when we see him or it in its daylight manifestation, does have a kind of a face, definitely, but it's a very uncanny face. It's not a cute face. It's not a cuddly face. And it's looking at us with these strange eyes. And again, its point of view is what we are dealing with. We are suddenly looking at a creature looking at us in a way that is not particularly friendly or even that interested, because in the Princess Mononoke's universe and in the animistic universe, why should other entities really care about us? They're doing their thing. The tree is doing its tree thing. The forest is doing its forest thing. The forest god is doing its forest god thing. And one of the things it does, which I think is just, again, exceptional bit of animation, is as it walks, we see flowers under its feet grow and die. It's a beautiful expression of the power of the forest god, that it gives life and it takes it away. But again, it has nothing to do with humanity. It's just talking about nature. This is what it does. And what to me, as I've said a number of times, is the Sistine Chapel of animation, certainly in 1997, and I would argue still one of the greatest moments in animation, is when the forest god takes on its night walker, its Shishigami manifestation, and becomes this translucent, phantasmagorical, ectoplasmic creature that barely has a face, that has a body that seems to be neither here nor there. It's crossing boundaries from the natural to the supernatural, and it is stunningly beautiful in its own way. And even more beautiful is a scene when the Shishigami is being followed by these Kodama, these little creatures, and they are looking up at it with pleasure and joy and kind of fascination, and it's doing its thing. And the Shishigami is saying, yay, we're getting some wind here from the Shishigami as it moves along. And it has nothing to do with human beings. This is a scene, in the whole scene, you see a little bit of some hunters who are shivering outside watching all this, but they're too scared to look. They're covering their eyes, because really we are seeing something that has never been seen by humans. This is an action, an interaction that has nothing to do with humans. And this is where Miyazaki takes us into another world, a supernatural world, again, where the point of view is not about us. The point of view is their interactions with each other, these supernatural beings. And these are very, very private pleasures, private joy, private sublimity that is very much taken away from not part of the human world. And we're just lucky to be able to see it. Okay, so if the Kodama, what if they could talk? What would they say is Princess Mononoke's legacy? By the way, the Kodama are also silent, but again, highly expressive. Well, I would say, first of all, that Princess Mononoke allows animation to be seen as something epic, profound, and powerful. By 1997, you certainly had adventure animation movies, some more successful than others. Disney, let's see, The Black Cauldron was an adventure animated movie that, interestingly enough, did not do well at the box office. It came out at the same time, roughly the same time as Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind. Miyazaki is one of his first films, which is epic and profound. So Princess Mononoke is really continuing that tradition, but because of the fact that it was seen in America, at least by some people, it really was setting up different expectations and different ways of reacting to animation that people were not used to. This is a work that is asking profound questions, things that we don't expect trivial children's cartoons to be doing. It's asking us how we live, how we want to live, what is our reason for being? What are we doing with the natural world? What is the natural world doing with us? Again, point of view. We're seeing things from all different points of view in a way that we've never had before. And it's forcing us to ask things. It's not a comfortable movie. It's not a comforting movie. The end, with its ambiguity, is something that also is quite profound. It doesn't give us the easy answer. And because of all this, I would argue it's a very powerful movie, because it does leave us with these questions. But it's also such a beautifully animated movie that we love being in there. We love dealing with the uncomfortableness. We love having our eyes opened up. Also, in many ways, it shows us personal, heartfelt, and complex relationships, again, in a way that you would not expect from the traditional conventional idea of animation. I chose this slide because I think it's such a beautiful scene. Ashitaka is has been rescued by San, who sort of is kind of warming up to him, and he's put in a cave beneath the layer of San's mother, Moro, and he comes out into the moonlight, and he and Moro have a little chat. And again, this is not cute and cuddly. Moro says in a very strange and really beautifully weird voice, she said, "Well, really, I should just bite your head off." And she doesn't say, "Ha, just joke." No, that she really does think it might be perfectly worthwhile to bite his head off. And he kind of gets it. And they have this interchange that's very kind of very personal. She talks about how she found San, how she loves her daughter, how she hates humans. And Ashitaka tries to reason with her, with his own feelings. And it's a wonderful, wonderful scene in which you have a heartfelt interchange between, again, a non-human species and a human species. And they're both respecting each other in their own way. And finally, I would suggest, as I've been suggesting all along, Princess Mononoke offers us a new way to engage with the universe, a new way to look at animation, but also to look at the world around us in a way that will hopefully become more and more a part of the world as we continue on into the 21st century. Thank you. And I'm going to end with a quote from Neil Gaiman. "Princess Mononoke is more relevant now than it ever has been." Thank you very much. Thank you.
What a joy, what a delight. You have a wonderful gift of providing a terrific sort of wider, richer perspective on the experience of Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli films. I know with this film, what always stood out for me was Miyazaki's real intentional kind of throwing out of every rule of traditional storytelling and kind of going at it with this. And you hit on so many of those wonderful areas. I think, even there may have been, to your point earlier, a bit of a disservice about Western handling of this film upon its initial release. And to Neil Gaiman's point here, that it is more relevant today. And I think we're able to understand it now, those of us with entrenched Western sensibilities. And thank you for your gentle uprooting of that so that we can shake those roots off and look at this a little differently. Talk about today, where we can reapproach this film, how we can look at it with fresh eyes today now from its initial release.
Well, I think I say this from the basis of my experience in teaching Miyazaki to undergraduates over the last 10 years, and they are definitely bringing in fresh eyes. What's interesting is they've already gotten a lot of their Western preconceptions at least somewhat uprooted, not all of them, but they are certainly, if they're going to be interested in Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli films, they almost have to be open to a different view of human beings and the environment, a concern for the environment, and a willingness, and this, as I said, one of the most difficult things is, of course, to not look for villains. Because I think one of Miyazaki's most important points is that he's trying to say, don't keep looking for the obvious villain. That's not helping anyone. And the film, I should mention this. This is very important. It's not a simplistic allegory of technology bad, nature good, or humans bad, beasts good. Absolutely not. This is why this is maybe one of the reasons why the film is so important, because it doesn't allow us that really simplistic and rather useless way of approaching the world. Because let's face it, we need technology. Miyazaki totally understands and appreciates technology. I mean, he loves planes, particularly older planes, cool planes, and he loves cars, cool cars, and he understands that it's really nice to have electricity. and water coming out of taps. He really gets that, and he's not going to say, "Oh no, let's all go live in the woods." He's also not going to say that all humans are bad or that all humans are good. Princess Mononoke shows a real gamut of human beings, some selfish, some annoying, some fairly saintly, but he's saying that people are complicated, and he's not trying to pretend that that just because they're marginal that they're good either. I mean, you see one of his pleasures of Irontown is the women talking back to their men, the men talking back to the women, a real sense of really remarkable kind of believable conversation among these different kinds of people. So I'd say I really need to emphasize that what he's saying is that we are living in a world where the technological condition is all around us. Having accepted that, how now do we go on with the world? Probably by respecting nature, but even perhaps respecting technology and its incredible forcefulness. I mean, the fact that Lady Eboshi has a gun, there's no sense that the gun is valorized, but it still is there. It's a piece of equipment, and it does, and we see the lepers making it. So this is a world where we do have to acknowledge technology, and we can't just have kind of black and white values, good, bad, black, white. It's very, I keep saying complex, but that is important. He wants us to acknowledge the complexity of the world. And I think my undergraduates are getting that more and more. And it's one reason why they come to something like Princess Mononoke, and they already kind of see it with fresh eyes, because they are looking at a movie. They may have seen it as a child. Many of them come to my class because they loved Ghibli as children, but now they're seeing it in relation to this very complicated, difficult, painful world that we now live in.
And we think of animation, and in the Western world, we're sort of entrenched in this idea of fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And Miyazaki blends fantasy, but I think is probably one of the more realistic filmmakers
Absolutely.
and storytellers in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
That, as the harshness, the realities, the complexities of our own world and our own life, he does not shy away from that, and he's not taking us off. There's fantasy there to a degree, but it's primarily, to your point, bringing in these areas of the harshnesses and realities.
I totally agree. That's such an important point. He's a very credible filmmaker.
Yeah.
He doesn't have little fairies coming out and dancing around. He may have kodama, but they are definitely they're tree spirits. They belong. They, in fact, keep the forest healthy. So they have a practical function as well. Yeah. And he uses fantasy. I do say this a lot. And fantasy is a way to kind of defamiliarize the real, to make us deal with tough things that are going on in real life, but a little bit at arm's length through fantasy, so we can see the kodamas, but we can also see them as really a way of working through the health of the forests and the problem of how do we keep forests healthy. In terms of the beasts, we're looking, he gives them speech, but he gives them in a way that is kind of credible speech. Again, it's not cute, cuddly speech. It's, we hate you humans, we're going to eat you. And so he is he knows emotions. He read a lot of English and European children's literature, both as a child and also as an undergraduate. And I think he really builds his characters with psychological depth and three-dimensionality that is also very impressive. So we believe in the characters. So they may exist in a fantasy world, but they're highly credible characters. But I would also say he does such an incredible job creating these other worlds, and they are so damn beautiful that he makes us want to spend time in there and deal with the complicated, sometimes, as I said, uncomfortable ideas, partly because they are such beautiful fantasy worlds that we're happy to to enter into them.
Absolutely. Keith, jump in.
My recollection is just the first time I saw this back in the late 1990s. And I'd never seen a film quite like this that had those metaphors for dealing with the environment and the impact on the environment. And as I was watching it, I kept having that idea of indigenous people.
Yes.
Living here in the Pacific Northwest, of course, we have Haida Gwaii and Musqueam and Squamish, the Zulu nations. We're very familiar with how they're in tune with nature. And that's what I saw in this, more than any other film before it. But since then, I see this theme, being borrowed or carried on. It's a universal theme, but this was the film that really had an impact on that. So then when Avatar comes out, it's like, that's Princess Mononoke.
Yeah.
That's all.
Very vocal about the inspiration for Avatar emanating from this film.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, Cameron's, as I said, he's very willing to acknowledge that. And it's so cool. I'm so glad you brought up the First Nation people in Canada, because yes, there are so many parallels with Indigenous people's beliefs and and Shinto as well. That's fascinating. I would also say that I think Disney has also been really affected by not just Princess Mononoke, but a lot of the whole Ghibli output as well. But I think in particular Frozen 1 and 2, particularly Frozen 2, is a work that probably couldn't have been made without the example of Princess Mononoke. The respect for not just the indigenous people that we see, but also how the forest has its own, remember the gale, the wind has its own manifestation, spiritual manifestation, and the horse that does not talk, and it's not cute or cuddly. It's a horse. It's a river spirit. It looks at Elsa. Elsa looks at it. And again, that point of view, we see all of a sudden Disney is showing things from a different point of view, a non-human point of view.
Yeah, it really highlights our relationship with the environment. And that's why when I look at the indigenous peoples here, they are much more attuned. They just say we have a Judeo-Christian background, but that animist idea and that connection to the environment is much more closely found with, whether it's in the Amazon or in the Pacific Northwest or other countries.
Yeah, there's no question animism is really coming on strong these days. I was in England this summer, and I walked into the Tate Gallery bookstore, and there was this big old book on animism, just one of the first books on display, and that just simply would not have happened 10 years ago. And it wasn't simply about Princess Mononoke or even about Japan, but it is, I think, something that is more and more in terms of ecological, environmental kind of works. This is becoming a really important way of again engaging with our contemporary world.
I think quite timely in light of our recognition of climate change.
I was going to even bring up Hurricane Ian. Yeah. I don't know how noticeable that was in Canada, but that again, when you think about nature striking back, I mean, wow, that is nature, the voice speaking out of the whirlwind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the staying power of this film, we're still just getting a glimpse of. I think this will be rediscovered. I trust this will be rediscovered in future generations as, a turning point in many ways, but particularly in these themes.
Yeah, I have no question. Actually, the BBC interview with Gaiman, they actually did interview me and Shiro Yoshioka, who's works on Miyazaki as well. And it was it's a long interview, and they were absolutely hammering home the point of view of the fact that we now need a non-human point of view.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Can we talk just a little bit, if you want to add some points about score and sound design?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I get this from Steve Alpert's book. The score is by Joe Hisaishi, who's a brilliant musician and a great conductor. Did you know that there's going to be a Royal Shakespeare Company in London?
Yes. Yeah,
is opening up a musical version of My Neighbor Totoro.
Well, yeah, because we've explored animation and storytelling through exhibition and other
Cool.
areas for
Of
different
course, yeah.
disciplines, but yeah, taking this onto the stage, let's
Yes,
definitely explore
it's
that.
very exciting. And the fact that Joe Hisaishi was willing to have his music
Yeah.
used and then to go on with that is great. But yeah, some of the score is absolutely haunting, particularly that scene, which I love so much of Ashitaka. In fact, is talking to Moro, and there's this moonlit night, and then you have this beautiful, the song of Princess Mononoke. You hear it off in the distance, and it's heartbreaking and haunting. It's gorgeous, and it's quite minimal. Now, what's so interesting is if you read, and I really do recommend Steve Alpert's book because it's hilarious. Let me just read to you what Miramax thought that the movie needed. Let's see, 246. Yes. Let's see. I was shown, this is Steve, a 9-page list of sound effects, a 9-page list of sound effects that Miramax wanted to add to the film. When there was little or no ambient sound, or where the effects had been used sparingly, the Miramax team wanted to add more sound. The Miramax list was a cornucopia of heavy footsteps, animals snorting, birds flying, birds singing, fire crackling, chickens cackling, drums drumming, cymbals clashing, magical tinkles, insect chirps, howling wind, flowing water, and loud animal god footsteps. Some of the suggested effects were difficult to imagine, like the sound of a cloud passing. I mean, this brings up a much larger point about Disney and Ghibli films and about Japanese versus American filmmaking. Japanese film is much more comfortable with not so heavy duty a soundtrack. Japanese film, again, not just Ghibli, but very much the case of Ghibli, are absolutely okay with silence. And this was a real problem, not just with Princess Mononoke, but when they were dubbing My Neighbor Totoro, Kiki's Delivery Service, La Puta, Castle in the Sky. They wanted to bring in more music. They actually had more music composed for the film because the feeling is the American or the Western audience, but I think particularly the American audience, just can't deal with silence. And in particular, the American audience needs music to kind of be told how it should feel about what's going on, because otherwise they'd be forced to figure it out for themselves, God forbid. So, I mean, again, this is just such a different point of view. And what is just, it's really hilarious. But also, again, I think that would be interesting. As I said, I'm writing this book on Disney studios in comparison to Ghibli. I should see if in recent Disney films they're allowing more silence, because this is a really very, very important part of this movie, of these movies. I'm so glad you brought it up because it's fascinating to compare the cultural differences.
Yeah. I think too, Neil Gaiman's translations, I've often wondered, what we may have lost.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I know.
Translations that, was that actually interpreted as it was intended? And could there have been?
The translation is perfectly good. I speak Japanese, and I first saw it in Japanese, and I didn't feel any horror when I saw the translation. It's always difficult. One thing is they use, in some ways, at certain points, Ashitaka in particular uses very formal, old-fashioned speech. When he's talking to the boar god, it's extremely formal. Or even when he's talking to San initially, that is really hard to translate. So, and I can understand why they wouldn't. You don't want to have people saying thee and thou and prithee, fair sir, and everything. It just kind of messes up the flow of the movie.
Yeah. Well, tremendous insights, and I'm excited to see where this film will be in the coming years. And
me too. I think it'll have a very important place as our world churns and burns and changes. It will be a kind of focal, a kind of a light in the darkness.
But definitely lending to its timelessness.
Yes, exactly.
We are grateful, Susan, for your time, your talents, your expertise, and your keen insights into this extraordinary work.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. I do love it. It's such an incredible movie. Thank you for letting me share my ideas about it. Thanks.
Thank you. Look for more at sparkanimation.com.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the online sessions for the Spark Animation Festival. My name is Keith Blackmore, and I'm the conference producer for the Spark Animation Festival. And this is the online Q&A. Considered to be one of the best animated films of all time, Princess Mononoke celebrates its 25th anniversary this year, and it has inspired numerous films since it was released and is often credited with helping popularize anime in the West. And in this, we have invited a very special guest, scholar, educator, and writer, Susan Napier. And we're going to explore the making of Princess Mononoke, but particularly its contrast with Western animation, as well as the themes that continue to inspire cinema today. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to hear what questions are going to be directed here.
Well, first off, you're teaching at, remind us, what school are you teaching at? In
Tufts University. That's in Boston.
Now, you're saying earlier that you've been teaching this week all about Princess Mononoke. What's your class on your scholarly look at Princess Mononoke this week?
Well, actually, it's been quite an interesting week. The class is actually Disney Studios meets Ghibli Studios, or Walt Disney Studios meets Studio Ghibli, aka Disley. And so I've been trying to pair up, or even sometimes triple up, movies from Disney and Ghibli that sort of work together on a common theme. And in this case, I did Princess Mononoke, and then we also did Takahata. That's Miyazaki's directing partner, the late Takahata Isao, his movie Pompoko, about a sort of eco-terrorist revolt by Japanese badgers. Quite a movie. And we compared those with Disney's Pocahontas.
Oh, wow.
And found all kinds of very interesting similarities and some major and intriguing differences that, if you know Miyazaki, you probably wouldn't be that surprised by. But I think one of the most important ones is that Disney very definitely has a kind of good versus evil mentality. And that's very clear in Pocahontas, although it's interesting, it's the settlers, the colonial settlers coming in who are evil, and the Native Americans who are good. Whereas in Princess Mononoke, it's a much more complex situation. We're having different groups, the beasts of the forest, the workers of a place called Irontown, which is led by a woman, Lady Eboshi, and then a representative of a almost like an Aboriginal group from sort of north of Japan called the Amishi in the film, and his name is Ashitaka. And so you have really three major groups there, plus all kinds of other interesting people coming in, such as samurai and workers in the ironworks, and it's quite an experience getting through the movie, and the students generally really love it. But it's they understand it's a more of a tapestry of a film than a fairly simple kind of Disney film would be.
Well, this is what I find in the contrast between West and East, is that West has clearly defined good guys and bad guys. They love that, to see who it is, but it's not so simple in anime and in life itself. And that's what I see reflected in especially Miyazaki's films, that contrast where we see the complexity, as you mentioned, of the characters, and they can be both good and bad in that. So
yeah, and that can take a while. I'm still right now. I'm grading their responses the last couple of weeks. So I say I'm thinking a lot about Princess Mononoke, and even there, we still see students who really, really want to find good and evil, and particularly they want to find evil because evil is, let's face it, it's sort of exciting. It's fun. You have an antagonist and you can have a conflict with, and it makes, I think, Western audiences quite uncomfortable not being able to find that. And so I just read actually a very eloquent argument by one student who said, basically, Lady Eboshi, whom many people think of as a rather interesting vision of a leader who is sort of trying to do her best for the people whom she's giving employment to, but unfortunately her best includes destroying the forest and the beasts and the gods who live in the forest. Well, my students found her just utterly awful. That there's just she's just a complete power hungry mad dog. Okay, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we get it.
there's a point there. There's a point there, but
But
I still think it's more complicated.
I think that's what I really enjoy with Miyazaki in this film, is that he really explores the themes of environmentalism and anti-war sentiment, but it's really rooted in Japanese folklore and animism.
Yes, absolutely, and that's another thing that is really one of the pleasures of Princess Mononoke, and I think people do get that either consciously or unconsciously, just because the animation is so gorgeous. The color palette alone, with its deep, intense greens. I mean, the forest becomes absolutely a character in itself. And then there are scenes of water and plants growing, and this deer god who by day takes on the form of a many antlered deer with a kind of strange face, but still kind of a quasi recognizable animal, and the deer god, while it walks, the flowers spring up and then they wither. I mean, it's a beautiful, just like a 5-second, maybe not even that much long, a sort of scene in which you see the fact that the god has these powers to give a life and to take it away. And then you have this very, very amazing other vision when the god takes on its night form as a Detarabochi. I think it's called the Night Walker in English. And it's this translucent, phantasmagory of a giant, strange creature, very, very strange, but quite beautiful as well, kind of that manifests itself in front of the moon above the mountains. And there's a kind of eeriness to these scenes that, again, would not be something. In fact, we were talking about this in class. Can we find eeriness in Disney? And probably not, because eeriness is a little, again, hard to quantify, hard to categorize, hard to really put into a black and white, good versus evil kind of movie, because the deer god is neither a good god nor a bad god. It's a god, and it's different and it's other, and that's what we're supposed to see. And again, just to bring up Disney, the Pocahontas, we do have a little bit of an attempt at animism by Disney, which is Pocahontas has her mentor is a willow tree called Grandmother Willow. And that's kind of cool. And if you've read Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, you might remember an important willow tree there. In this case, of course, the willow tree is a very good willow tree in the Pocahontas, and a very kindly, motherly willow tree. But of course, just to make it more user-friendly, the willow tree has to have the face of a kindly old woman, so we don't get too weirded out. And very, very different from the vision of the Night Walker or even the deer god. So there is this attempt to bring an environmental animistic message, even with Disney. And I think Disney by this point was becoming very aware of Miyazaki, of Studio Ghibli. And I would not at all be surprised if there is some influence from there. But at the same time, where Princess Mononoke is so radical is in its kind of saying that the environment is not cute or sweet or kindly, it's other. And we have to engage with it on its own terms. It's not going to kind of turn into a sweet old lady and talk to us.
Yeah. One of the things that connected with me was in watching it, and we talked a little bit about this with your last visit, was here in the Pacific Northwest with the indigenous peoples, right? The First Nations people, and that same kind of sentimentality, that connection with the environment as well. And we see so much of that this in their folklore and their stories of that connection with animals and trees and nature itself. And that's really what Miyazaki is doing with Mononoke as well.
Absolutely. I love that. And Miyazaki is going back to earlier kind of Japanese indigenous traditions, as you said, folklore, and possibly even earlier than Shinto. But Shinto is also, that's the sort of main Japanese indigenous way belief, which definitely suggests that you have spirits in other things, in spirits in a stone, spirits in a waterfall, spirits in a tree. And I think that is also close to what First People or Native Americans also have. And it's a much more interconnected vision of humans vis-a-vis the rest of the world.
Yeah. Francine's asking here, why do you think Studio Ghibli's work has managed to cross cultures and have such a long-lasting appeal? Because it's not just appealing there in Japan and North America, but France and every other country. It has such a huge appeal.
Oh yeah, I mean, in fact, I have to brag a little bit. I wrote this book called Miyazaki World, and it's been translated as of last week into 11 languages, including Arabic, Vietnamese. Just last week, it's being translated to Thai, Korean, Chinese, and French and Spanish. Thank you very much. Actually, the book, although that book has also been translated.
You have? Let's show you. Let's show your books there, Susan.
Yeah. This is the one that's been, although anime has been translated.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, this is one on Miyazaki in particular. But yeah, what is it about universal, what universal quality does Miyazaki and Ghibli have that they could be popular around the world? And I think that's an incredibly central question. And it's something that I'm working on right now for a talk I'm giving another week or so. And it's going to be, actually I gave you the talk in the Middle East, and I'm thinking that one reason why Ghibli is so popular, I mean, of course you can say the beauty, the gorgeousness of the imagery, the very sympathetic, interesting, very relatable characters, the quite adventurous stories, all that, absolutely, and just great animation, really spectacular animation, hand-drawn, at least until very recently. But I also think that Studio Ghibli, because it doesn't give us easy solutions, because it doesn't allow us to just go into the black and white thinking good versus evil, because it often ends in ambiguity. Many of the movies do not end with a clear-cut happy ending. And that's certainly true of Princess Mononoke, which, as you may remember, people sort of walked out of the theater when they're first shown in America, at least, to say, well, what really happened? Is it going to be okay? Is it going to be okay? Yeah, and, right. Miyazaki's not going to let us feel like it's definitely going to be okay, because we don't know. And I think, if anything, over the last few years, that kind of ambiguity, that sense of kind of loss, I call it ambiguous loss, is something that is more and more a part of our contemporary society. And I don't mean just in America or in Japan or in Canada, but around the world. I mean, we've had to deal with COVID, which is all about loss, and not just loss of people and loved ones, although that's very important, but also loss of certainty in the future. I mean, I think about my students who are dealing with, they don't know what's going to happen next in a way that they really don't know. Again, it's ambiguous. And same with the climate change. We don't know what's going to happen next. We're uncertain. So for me, I think one reason why Studio Ghibli and Princess Mononoke, for example, are so very germane and appropriate to the situation is because they're willing to deal with this very, very difficult, complex world that we now inhabit.
Yeah, they don't have that happily ever after feel. Yeah. They never have that, all the loose ends are tied up and we go off and it's completed. No. And Mononoke, to that point, it is that feel of uncertainty about the cautionary tale about greed, man's greed and corporate greed, man against nature, and the destruction of nature. Those themes, as you say, they resonate with us today. They're still hidden, right? So,
also, the allure of technology. I mean, Miyazaki, I always have to emphasize it, he would not call himself a, quote, tree hugger, quote unquote. He drives a car. He takes planes. He likes technology in many ways. He loves old style airplanes. He's fascinated by them. He loves to draw pictures of them. But he understands that technology has got us into this terrible hole, this terrible condition where on the one hand, we feel like we're dependent on technology. And again, that goes back to Lydia Boshi in Irontown. You know, she's providing jobs for people. She's providing, she's doing a very important service, which is creating, you know, she's an iron foundry, which makes weapons. And we've become dependent on weapons too, by the way. And how do we deal with this? How do we deal with the technological condition? And I think this is something that, as you just said, Keith, where this is part of our world, and we can't walk away. We really can't turn off the lights. We're trying. We are really trying, but it's going to be very hard to totally dismiss everything that modernity and technology have accumulated here in the last 300, 400, 500 years.
Yeah, exactly. Now, a year ago, the Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences, they opened up a new museum, and the very first exhibition was on Miyazaki. We have the book here, and now you had a role in that. What was your role in that exhibition?
Well, I actually I was on a panel before the exhibition came out with two of the curators, and their names are in the catalog. And it was, I think, I don't want to say it was for Comic-Con. It was something like that, though. Okay. And it was enormously fun because I realized that these people really knew their Miyazaki. I mean, you know what it's like to geek out with someone who really knows what they're talking about. I thought, dang, these people, I mean, I would talk about things and they would appreciate it, but they also had their own ideas, and they really had a strong vision of what Miyazaki has contributed to the world in terms of movies, you know, because this is the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures, but also about the way of thinking that Miyazaki also helps contribute. And again, the ambiguity, the complexity of his films, and even the plots, the adventures, the characters, that again is really different. And one thing that's terribly important to remember is that this was the very first special exhibit at the Academy Museum, and they did not choose, first of all, a live action filmmaker, which you totally would expect they would, right? And they did not choose an American filmmaker, again, which would have expected, because my goodness, the museum is in Los Angeles. It's in Hollywood, for heaven's sakes. But the fact that they chose a Japanese animator, I mean, when I first heard about it, I thought my heart, you know, beat very fast. It lifted up. I mean, it was so great that Miyazaki's contributions were really acknowledged. And I have to admit, I checked in on, I did give a lecture at the museum later on, and I constantly checked in on how the audiences were doing, what people were thinking about the museum, and hands down, the thing they talked most about was the Miyazaki exhibit. So that was a kind of very gratifying, and, you know, gives us kind of hope for the future.
Yeah, we're kind of starting this question probably should have been at the beginning, but give us a little bit of background about your role. What got you interested in anime in Japan and working even with Miyazaki?
Wow, I should probably have brought in my Akira manga books, because that was where it started. I was teaching Japanese language long ago at the University of Texas, and one of my students brought in this graphic novel, which I knew by then was a manga, but I didn't know much about it, and it was called Akira. And I sort of thought, interesting, and, you know, looked through it and thought, oh my God, this is really special. This is really different. And I loved it. I mean, the first thing I opened up to was this big page with a full page illustration of a gigantic black crater. I thought, whoa, you know, this is not Superman. This is not Archie. This is something really different. I grew up and I loved comics as a child. And so then I got to see the film, which I'm sure many of you have seen. It is absolute classic. I still teach it in my anime courses, and my students come out and they're young. You know, they were probably not even alive when, they probably weren't alive when Akira first came out. They come out saying, well, I get it. You know, the animation is spectacular. It's kinetic. It's visceral. The music is incredible. The story is dark and dystopian. And that's what I was fascinated by the fact that this wasn't giving us the easy kind of easy answers that not just Hollywood animation, but Hollywood cinema was giving. It was taking down some very dark alleyways into a world where you really don't know what's going to happen next. And the magic of the animation in the film allows you to go into these other worlds. And so the next movie I saw after that was Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. That's just a beautiful movie, and one that really needs to be remembered as one of the great films that Miyazaki has created. And it has an incredible post-apocalyptic wasteland vision, but it also has a really interesting female protagonist. And that really drew me in, because I thought, geez, this is 19, her late, maybe early 1990s. And even at that point, Western films were not giving us strong female protagonists. Certainly not one like Nausicaa, who's such an interesting, very intriguing, some ways almost tragic figure, who's but also is very cool, who's an excellent swordswoman, pilots her own little glider around, is a scientist doing experiments in her laboratory, is an adventurer willing to go out and look and see at new worlds. I mean, it was just, and that's Miyazaki's imagination, that he was able to create such a strong, complex, independent female character. And that's just, that again, really particularly drew me to Miyazaki, and why I've particularly worked on him over the years.
Yeah. And you worked in Japan as well?
Yes, I lived in Japan and worked there for about 8 years in all, starting from the time I was 17, when I was actually teaching English. Yes, I've worked, and I've been at a university in Japan, Keio University in Tokyo. And of course, I started studying Japanese in high school, and I'm still studying Japanese now. It's a difficult language, but it's really been worth it, because it allows me to get a whole spectrum of different ideas and approaches to Miyazaki than I would if I were only confined to English or European sources. So that's really been very interesting. I just found a really wonderful book. I can't remember if I mentioned it before, by one of Miyazaki's fellow directors, not at Ghibli, but a man named Oshii Mamoru, who did Ghost in the Shell.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I mentioned that. It's kind of a hilarious book. It's Oshii is being interviewed by someone who also knows Ghibli. It's all about Ghibli, and it's all about Miyazaki. It's all about the director Mamoru Oshii's opinion of Miyazaki, which he has a lot to say. And it's such fun, because with someone like Miyazaki, or with someone like Disney, or any really famous icon, there tends to be a lot of admiration and reverence. And of course, in Miyazaki's case, that's completely justified. But, he's still a human being. He's still, not all his films are absolute classics. I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, oh boy. Everyone has their favorites and non-favorites. But you see, with reading fellow Japanese directors, very open feelings and discussions of Miyazaki's movies, it's incredibly refreshing and interesting, and seeing the kind of things that he points out that I would never have thought of, because I'm not Japanese, and that's the kind of thing that I feel like I hope to bring to my research. That something is kind of a fresh and sort of original approach that I can integrate a lot of Japanese commentary into my own research. I've written 5 books, and so by this point, I know something about Japanese animation, but there's always so much more to learn.
I think you do. I think you're the resident expert. Well, thank you very much, Susan. It's been such a pleasure talking with you, discussing this, and you're so articulate in being able to express these things. And just to our audience, if you're interested in exploring more about Princess Mononoke, anime, or these other studios, take a look for Susan Napier's books. They're wherever books are sold.
Quick
ad. All kinds of great writing.
New Miyazaki book just translated into English. It's really beautiful.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you again, Susan. And if you'd like to see the full interview that we had earlier the last month, I would encourage you to go to www.trickfilm.com, where you'll find this and a whole lot of other films with other filmmakers and animators. Thanks again. You take care.
Thank you.